Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
They were being integrated, live, broadcast across the sector to every species capable of receiving it. The transmission had no identifier. It simply took control of every active frequency and replaced whatever had been there before. The feed opened on a room with clean walls and pale light, where 5 figures stood on a raised platform, spaced with careful precision, far enough apart to stand alone. 3 aliens on the left, 2 humans on the right. This was the ceremony of integration. At the center stood the apparatus, not large, not visibly complex, a vertical frame of interlocked components humming just below audible range, cables running into the floor, and from there into something far beyond the confines of the room. At the far end, Overseer Sec Thal watched them without speaking, allowing the silence to linger long enough for every observer to understand what they were seeing and what was about to happen. The ceremony of integration is not punishment. It is continuation. Your consciousness will persist. Your experience will be preserved. You will not end. You will become part of something that does not end. Do you accept integration? Elder Soreth of the Peleron Union stepped forward before Sec Thal finished speaking. The bioluminescent patches along his neck and shoulders had already shifted to pale gold. In Peleron culture, that color meant acceptance. It meant peace with what was coming. Sorath was tall, slow-moving, and he walked to the apparatus without hesitation. He placed both hands on the contact points of the frame. The apparatus hummed louder for 3 seconds. Then Sorath went still. Not dead, just still. The integration registered clean on Sec Thal's console, a new node active in the network. Elder Soreth of the Peleron Union. Preserved, processing. Part of the infrastructure now. Warden Kale Doss of the Droon Collective moved forward when it was his turn. He had the bearing of a soldier who understood when a fight was over and did not pretend otherwise. 4 arms, an exoskeleton built for close-quarters combat, traits that had kept the Droon alive for 11 months against the Narek fleet. None of it had been enough. He did not look at the humans when he passed them. He placed his hands on the apparatus. The integration ran clean. Another node. The network grew by one more voice that would never speak again. Speaker Thayan of the Oscan hierarchy began to recite. The Oscan resonance chamber in his chest produced harmonics as he spoke. Layered tones that carried the formal declaration of acceptance, the recitation of lineage, the gratitude ritual that the Oscan performed at the threshold of any permanent transition. It was a death ritual dressed as a welcome, and everyone in the room understood that, including Thean. Sec Thal waited. The Narek had learned to let the Oscan finish. In the ceremony of integration, ritual was not required, but it reduced resistance. A completed recitation made the process cleaner. The difference in efficiency was measurable. Thean finished. He stepped to the apparatus. He integrated cleanly. 3 for 3. The pattern held. Sec Thal turned to the 2 humans on the right side of the platform. He asked the question, the same question every time. Do you accept integration? Corporal Thor Swanson stood with his hands at his sides and his weight evenly distributed. Medium build. A scar along the left side of his jaw. He had spent 3 weeks in a Narek holding cell, watching fleet assets, repositioned through a small viewport. He had counted ships. He had memorized approach vectors and staging intervals. He had done this continuously, methodically, because it was the only useful thing available to him, and Swanson did not waste time. Swanson looked at the camera feeding the galaxy-wide broadcast. Not at Sec Thal, at the camera. At every species, watching from every system in range. He held that look for 2 seconds. Then he shook his head once. Specialist Corin Mast stood beside him, lean, eyes that had been moving since the broadcast began, reading the apparatus, reading the cables running into the floor, reading the console Sec Thal operated. When Sec Thal asked the question, Mast did not look at the camera. He did not look at the overseer. He said one word. No. Then he looked back at the apparatus and kept studying it. Sec Thal processed this for exactly 1 second. Refusal was not unprecedented. Some species produced individuals who refused. The system accommodated this. The ceremony offered choice, but the integration did not require it. Consent made the process cleaner. The absence of consent made it noisier. The result was the same. He initiated forced integration on Swanson first. The apparatus engaged. The hum rose in pitch. The cables carrying signal from the frame into the floor pulsed with activity. Then the signal stalled. The integration process was running, but not completing. Sec Thal's console showed the process at 63% and holding. The way a transmission holds when the receiving end is not answering correctly. The system kept pushing. The system was very good at pushing. Swanson's body went still. The process had him physically. But the network registration came back wrong. The node was listed as active. The location within the network was not found. The system was looking for him inside itself and not finding him where he was supposed to be. He was in there. The system just couldn't locate him. Mast went second. The apparatus recalibrated and re-engaged. The delay before stall was longer this time. 40 seconds of normal processing, followed by the same failure to complete. Mast's body stilled. His node registered active. Then a signal appeared in the network log on Sec Thal's display. No source, no authorization code, no matching integration pathway. It was simply there, moving through sections of the network that required administrative clearance to access. And it was not moving like a new node finding its place. It was moving like something that already knew the layout and was looking for something specific. The broadcast cut. In a UED command installation 3 systems from Earth, Director Aldrich Morn watched the entire feed in silence. He was not a large man. He had the kind of stillness that came from spending decades reading situations where the wrong reaction cost lives. His desk had 14 months of NARIC data on it, engagement records, integration logs from species that no longer existed as independent entities, including limited data from early human encounters, network architecture maps pieced together from signal intercepts, and the testimony of the few who had escaped NARIC capture before the ceremony reached them. He had read all of it, multiple times. He sat with the now dark broadcast feed for 11 seconds. The NARIC system was the spine of everything the NARIC did. Logistics, coordination, strategic prediction. Every fleet movement, every resource allocation, every tactical decision ran through a network that was built from the minds of every species that had ever accepted the ceremony. Remove the network, and the NARIC were a fleet without orders, capable individually, helpless collectively. Morn looked at the frozen feed, and then at the data spread across his desk. Most species accepted the process. That much was clear from the records. They adapted, settled into the system, and became part of it without incident. The humans hadn't. They had refused, openly and without hesitation, and the broadcast had cut almost immediately after the process began. That timing was too precise to ignore. He didn't know what had happened inside the system, but he could follow the implication. If the network had been built around minds that accepted the signal, then resistance wouldn't simply fail, it would interfere. And human cognition, as far as the data suggested, didn't just resist. It pushed back. generating contradiction rather than compliance. If that process had continued, it was unlikely to have resolved cleanly. It might have destabilized whatever it was connected to. Morn picked up the comm. Sergeant Bowen Tark answered on the second signal. "You watched it," Morn said. "Yes, sir." "You understand what happened?" It was not a question. Tark had been briefed on the Narek network architecture 2 weeks ago. Morn had made sure of it. "Yes, sir." Morn looked at the fleet trajectory data on the secondary screen. The Narek were already moving. The fleet repositioning Swanson had spent 3 weeks memorizing from a viewport had been the leading edge of it. The main body was behind it. Earth was the destination. The ceremony would be held again, this time for 8 billion people instead of 5 captives. "How many integration hubs are within strike range of our current forward positions?" Tark did not answer immediately. Morn heard him pulling up the tactical map. 4 confirmed, possibly a 5th if the intercept data from last week holds. "Assume it holds." "Then 5. Morn looked at the fleet trajectory again, looked at the timeline it implied, looked at what 14 months of data told him about how fast the Narek could reposition once they understood they were being targeted. "The mission is not to stop the fleet," he said. "The mission is to feed the system until it chokes on us." Silence on the line. Then, "Understood. You have 6 hours." The line closed. In the Narek Fleet Command Center, Overseer Sek Thal reviewed the broadcast data with Coordinator Ash Marin standing 2 paces to his left. The integration logs were open on the display between them. The anomalies were logged clearly. The corrupted signals. The unauthorized second presence moving through restricted network sections. Ash Marin had flagged it before Sek Thal finished reviewing the first anomaly. "The signals are not decaying," Ash Marin said, his tone controlled. He had learned that data delivered calmly was more likely to be heard, and this needed to be heard. Standard integration artifacts, residual signal noise from the process, degrade within 4 cycles. These are holding at initial amplitude. He adjusted the display slightly. That signal has already moved through 3 restricted sections since the broadcast ended. Sek Thal studied the logs. New species integration always produces artifacts. Not like this. The humans are noisier than most. The artifacts will resolve. Ash Marin looked at the data. He looked at Sek Thal. He did not argue. Arguing with the Overseer about data the Overseer had already categorized was not productive. He had learned that also. He filed the flag in the system log with a priority marker and went back to watching the numbers. The numbers were not resolving. The fleet trajectory locked onto Earth's position, and the Narek advance units began acceleration. The ceremony had been performed hundreds of times. It had never failed to produce integration. The artifacts from the 2 human captives were an irregularity. Irregularities had appeared before. They had always resolved within the system's correction cycles. There was no reason to believe this time was different. The fleet moved. The integration hub was not built to be defended. That was the first thing Tark noted when the strike team crested the ridge and got eyes on it. No perimeter wall. No overlapping fire positions. 2 Narek security units at the main entrance, standing with the relaxed posture of guards, who had never needed to be anything other than a formality. The facility itself was a low, wide structure, pressed into the ground like something that did not want to be noticed. Functional. Utilitarian. The kind of building that exists to house a process, not to impress anyone. No species had ever tried to take one from the outside. Sergeant Bowen Tark had 11 soldiers with him. He looked at the 2 guards for 3 seconds, then at the rest of the team. "Fast and quiet. We need the apparatus intact." They moved. The 2 guards were down before either raised an alarm. The team was through the entrance in 40 seconds. The interior was dim, climate-controlled, and humming. not loud. A low, continuous tone that Tark felt in his back teeth before he heard it with his ears. The kind of sound that had been running so long it had become part of the room. The apparatus units stood in a row along the far wall, 6 frames, each one upright, each one trailing cables into the floor junction that fed the network spine running through the bedrock beneath the facility. The Narek technician at the monitoring station turned from his console when the team entered and did not move again after that. Tark walked to the nearest frame and looked at it. He had studied the technical intercepts for 2 weeks. He knew what it did. He knew what it felt like, according to the data recovered from species who had described the process before integration completed. He knew what it meant to walk into one voluntarily when every part of the process was designed around a mind that didn't want to fight back. He turned to his team. "You all read the brief." They had. Not just what the apparatus did, but what they were expected to do once inside it. Hold the line, resist the signal, and not let the system settle them. First 4. Now. 4 soldiers moved to the frames without discussion. They sat in the contact positions the way the brief had described. Hands on the input points, back straight, eyes forward. One of them, a corporal named Bast, looked at Tark once before the frame engaged. Tark held the look. Bast nodded and faced forward. The apparatus activated across all 4 frames simultaneously. The hum in the room climbed in pitch and volume. The cables in the floor pulsed. The 4 soldiers went still in the way that Swanson and Mast had gone still on the broadcast. Not dead, not unconscious. Something in between that had no good name in any human language, because no human had come back from it to describe it accurately. The network received them. The bodies integrated. The minds did not cooperate. Then the network produced 4 error codes in rapid succession, none of them listed in the system's correction library. Tark watched the monitoring console. He could not read Narek system notation, but he could read the behavior of a system encountering something it did not have a response for. The console looked like that. He pulled out the comm. "First hub is running. 4 uploaded. Network is reacting." Morn's voice came back immediately, controlled. "Confirmed. Hold position and continue uploading until the hub is at capacity." Understood. Tark looked at the remaining 7 soldiers. Next 3. Across the network, Ash Marin had not left his station since the broadcast ended. He had slept 4 hours in the chair, eaten at the console, and filed 11 escalating flags in the system log, each one more precisely worded than the last, because precision was the only tool available to him when the person receiving the flags kept categorizing them as routine artifact resolution. The data on his screen was not routine. The 2 human anomalies from the broadcast had not decayed. They had grown. The unauthorized signal that appeared during Mast's integration had replicated itself across 3 additional network sections in the hours since the broadcast cut. It was not behaving like a new node finding its processing role. It was behaving like something that understood the network's architecture and was moving through it with intent. Then the first hub readings came in, 4 new human integration signatures, each producing the same class of errors as the broadcast anomalies, none resolving into stable node positions, each generating interference in the surrounding sections at a ratio Ash Marin calculated in 30 seconds, and immediately wished he hadn't. He was at Sekthal's command station before the calculation finished running. "Overseer." Sekthal did not look up from the fleet positioning display. The Earth operation was 3 hours from optimal strike range. Every part of his attention was on the approach vector and the integration protocols already being prepared for planetary-scale ceremony deployment. "The artifacts are multiplying," Ash Marin said. He kept his voice level. He kept the data in front of him, where Sekthal could see it without having to move. 4 new signatures from a surface hub, Same error class as the broadcast anomalies. The interference ratio in the affected sections has increased by a factor of 6 since initial registration. The isolation protocols I flagged 2 hours ago are not containing it. Sekthal looked at the data. He looked at it for a long time. The isolation protocols need adjustment. Route the fleet coordination channels around the affected sections entirely. Primary command traffic runs on the unaffected spine. The unaffected spine is 63% of total network capacity. If additional hubs produce similar signatures, one hub, Ash-Marin. 4 new signatures from one hub in less than 1 hour, Overseer. The broadcast produced 2 in less than 1 minute. The rate is, adjust the isolation protocols. Route around the dead zones. The fleet does not slow. Ash-Marin stopped. He looked at the data. He looked at Sekthal. He returned to his station and began adjusting the isolation protocols, watching them fail to hold even as he implemented them, and filed flag number 12 with a priority designation the system log had never previously required him to use. Meanwhile, Morn received Tark's confirmation. At the same moment, the signal intercepts showed the first Narek network irregularities propagating beyond the hub's local section. He looked at the timeline on the secondary screen. Fleet arrival at Earth, 2 hours 40 minutes at current velocity. Time required for the remaining 4 hubs to upload at the rate the first hub was demonstrating. Unknown. Possibly enough. Possibly not. Morn did not operate on possibly. He opened the command channel to all 4 forward unit positions simultaneously. All units move now. Targets are the 4 remaining integration hubs on your designated coordinates. Breach protocol is identical to the primary team. Apparatus must be taken intact. Upload immediately on breach. Do not wait for confirmation from this station. Do not wait for each other. Move and upload. 4 acknowledgements came back in 8 seconds. Morn closed the channel and looked at the fleet trajectory. He had no ships that could stop what was coming at Earth in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The UED forward fleet was positioned for exactly this operation and nothing else. Every asset was committed to the hub strikes. There was nothing held in reserve because holding something in reserve meant the hub strikes ran with less, and the math on less did not work. Earth was the bait. The hubs were the trap. He had not told anyone that framing. It was not the kind of thing that helped people perform better. All 5 hubs were uploaded within 90 minutes. The Narek network began to fail. Not suddenly, but the way a structure fails when the foundation is compromised. Section by section, each collapse shifting strain onto the next until those followed. The isolation protocols Sekthal had ordered routed command traffic around the dead zones, but the dead zones were expanding faster than the routing could compensate. What had been 4 contained sections was now 11. What had been interference in the processing nodes was now contradictory outputs, reaching the fleet coordination channels directly. Destroyer Group Keth-7 received movement orders at 0340 that contradicted the orders it had received at 0337. The group commander held position and requested clarification. Clarification came back with a 3rd set of coordinates that matched neither previous instruction. Keth-7 held position. Destroyer Group. Keth-12 received tactical probability assessments for the Earth approach that rated the operation at 91% success likelihood. It received a second assessment, 40 seconds later, rating the same operation at 34%. The Narek did not have a protocol for 2 simultaneous contradictory assessments from the same system. The group commander flagged it for resolution and waited. Keth-12 slowed. The prediction models the Narek used to anticipate enemy movements, resource requirements, and strategic responses had been running continuously since the fleet departed for Earth, all on the network. The network ran on integrated minds. The integrated human minds were not running calculations. They were doing something else entirely. something the system could not categorize or contain, and the outputs bleeding from those sections into the prediction models were producing results that described a reality the Narek fleet was not operating in. The fleet was still moving, but 2 destroyer groups had stopped. 3 more were running at reduced coordination efficiency. The prediction models were generating noise, and the isolation protocols that were supposed to contain all of it had consumed 40% of the unaffected network capacity just running the containment attempt, leaving the remaining clean sections operating the entire fleet's command structure on resources designed for a fraction of that load. Ashmarin looked at the numbers. He had been looking at numbers his entire career. He was very good at understanding what they meant before anyone else in the room did. He understood what these meant. He filed flag number 13. Then he stood up from his station, walked to Sekthal's command position, and stood there until the overseer looked at him. The unaffected network spine is now at 31% of total capacity, Ashmarin said. We have lost 2 destroyer groups to coordination failure. The prediction models are non-functional. If the humans have additional hubs to target. They do not have additional hubs, Sekthal said. They have 5 facilities within range. All 5 are already. He stopped. He looked at his console. All 5 hubs were uploading. Sekthal stood very still for a moment, longer than any Ashmarin had seen him spend on a single thought. How many minds, Sekthal said. Not to Ashmarin, not to anyone specifically. Looking at the upload rate data from all 5 facilities, calculating. How many minds are they willing to put in? Ashmarin looked at the data. All of them, he said. I think all of them, Overseer. The fleet was still moving toward Earth. It was making mistakes now that the Narek fleet had never made before. Small ones, still. But the network kept degrading. The human minds inside it kept spreading. And somewhere in the sections that the isolation protocols had long since stopped being able to touch, in the dead zones that were no longer dead, but instead running with a kind of activity the system had never been designed to produce, something was building. Ashmarin could not read what it was building, but he could tell it was not random. That was enough to know that everything that came next was going to be worse. Morn's tactical display showed the failure before the fleet finished arriving. He had been tracking the approach for hours, watching the Narek main body cross into Sol's system, not as a unified force, but as something struggling to remember how to be one. Formation lines tightened, then slipped. Vectors corrected, then overcorrected, then corrected again. Each adjustment slightly out of phase with the last. 2 destroyer groups still hung 3 light minutes behind the others. Locked in a coordination loop, they could neither resolve nor abandon. The fleet was there. That much was undeniable. But it was no longer whole. On the secondary display, the 5 hub signals continued without interruption. Tark's feed was still coming through, noisy, degraded, but stable in a way nothing else was anymore. The upload rates had long since exceeded anything the Narek system had been designed to measure. Morn's projections were no longer predictions. They were records of events that had already passed. The network was not degrading along any model he recognized. It was changing into something the original architecture had never been built to contain. He let his attention move between the 2, the fleet approaching Earth and the hubs feeding into the system, tracking how one was failing as the other continued. Then he waited. Tark had moved far enough away of Hub 5 to avoid triggering any defensive response, but not so far that the relay link degraded beyond use. 30 kilometers put him on a ridgeline with a clear view of the structure, and just enough elevation to maintain a stable uplink to Morn's system. It wasn't a clean signal. Nothing had been clean since the first 4 went into the frames and didn't let the system take them. The hum that had filled the hub came through his monitoring feed now, carried from within the network itself. A low, continuous vibration. It wasn't just sound. He could feel it through the ship's deck, which was wrong enough on its own. It had no rhythm he could map, no pattern he could track. Right now, his job was simple. Monitor the output, maintain the link, report when asked. The rest of it, what the others were doing inside the system, what it felt like, what it meant, was not something he could influence anymore. On Earth, the ceremony broadcast began, without any warning, without any request. Any active frequency on Earth shifted at once, overridden by a signal that did not negotiate for access because it had never needed to. Civilian networks, military channels, private systems, none of it mattered. The broadcast replaced whatever had been there with the quiet certainty of a process that had never failed to complete. Then the image resolved on Sekthal. Behind him, Saturn was framed in the viewport, its rings a thin arc of light, distant and centered, presented exactly as it had been for every species that had stood at this threshold before. He spoke the opening line with the same authority he had always used. The ceremony of integration is not punishment, it is continuation. The words carried outward across a system that no longer knew how to carry them. Ashmaran saw the problem immediately, not because the broadcast failed, at least not in the way failure had ever presented before, but because it didn't remain singular. The signal entered the network and split, not cleanly, but as a byproduct of routing layers that no longer agreed on what they were supposed to be doing. Segments of the transmission appeared out of sequence, overlapping, looping back through sections that had already processed them, arriving at endpoints before their source had finished sending. The system attempted correction. It pulled from prediction layers that were already compromised, feeding broken data into processes designed to resolve variance, not multiply it. The correction routines didn't stabilize the signal. They amplified the instability. Each pass through the network, introducing further divergence. Ashmaran watched the diagnostics degrade in real time, the metrics he had relied on his entire career becoming meaningless as the underlying structure they described ceased to behave consistently enough to measure. "Overseer," he said, keeping his voice level out of habit more than expectation. Sekthal did not respond. The broadcast is not maintaining a single transmission state. Still nothing. Ashmaran stepped closer, bringing the data into primary view, not because Sekthal needed to see it, but because the act of placing it there was the only form of escalation he had left. Signal fragmentation across core routing layers. The system is no longer resolving outputs consistently. Sekthal stopped speaking. The words he was delivering to 8 billion recipients were no longer being transmitted intact. He spoke a sentence. The system delivered fragments of it. He looked at the display. For the first time since the anomalies began, he did not categorize what he was seeing. The collapse followed. Not as a single event, but as a sequence that accelerated too quickly to interrupt. Sections already under strain failed first, shedding load into adjacent structures that had been compensating for hours. Those structures failed faster. The isolation protocols that had been rerouting traffic into safe channels began feeding into pathways that no longer existed as defined architecture. Within seconds, directionality was lost. Within minutes, so was coherence. Ashmaran watched the cascade from start to completion without moving from his station. At some point in the second minute, the preservation layers failed, the indicators dropping in a way he had never seen and didn't need to interpret further. At 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the network ceased. His console went dark, not degraded, not reduced. Gone. The command center fell silent, not abruptly, but in the absence of everything that had once filled it. There was no shared data anymore, no coordination threading the system together, only local operations, each isolated, each sufficient on its own, and nothing beyond that. Ashmarin let the silence settle, long enough to confirm what the instruments no longer needed to tell him before he spoke. Fleet coordination is no longer active. All vessels are operating independently. There was nothing further to clarify. Sekthal stood at the viewport, looking out across the Sol system, which remained exactly as it had been, unchanged, indifferent. Behind him, the broadcast feed persisted in local memory, frozen mid-sentence, a system that had begun a statement it no longer possessed the capacity to complete. He regarded it for a moment, then let his attention return to the display. The system had always worked. Every integration had confirmed it, every repetition reinforcing the certainty it would continue to do so, until it encountered something that did not resolve. He did not turn. "I know," he said. "Initiate withdrawal." The network could not carry the order, but local transmission and direct sensor tracking were sufficient. The flagship turned. Other ships followed. Around Earth, the UED Armada moved into readiness. Ships settled into defensive positions, weapon systems coming online, command channels tightening into place. But they were no longer moving to meet a unified enemy. The Narek fleet had entered the system broken. Its vessels were still dangerous, but they no longer acted as one. Each ship adjusted according to its own local sensors, making decisions that might have been reasonable in isolation, but meant little without shared targeting, coordinated vectors, or predictive modeling. The force approaching Earth was still a threat. It was no longer a fleet. Morn watched it all unfold from 3 systems away. He did not issue orders. The operation had moved beyond intervention. What remained was outcome. On his display, the structure built on absolute coordination reduced itself to independent motion, each part functioning, none of it connected. He shifted his attention once more to the hub signals. All 5 remained active. Still feeding. Still present inside a system no longer capable of containing it. In the command installation, no one spoke. The displays stabilized, not because the situation had resolved, but because there was nothing left to update. Morn stood with his hands at his sides, looking at the UED fleet above Earth and a planet that had not been touched. He did not reach for the comm. There was nothing left to confirm, nothing left to change. The outcome had already settled into place. The Narek system had been built on agreement. It had never been designed to face refusal.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.